Hey, this is sort of a less formal video from me. I went to Japan like 2 months ago now, it feels like yesterday, and I never really talked about what I got. So instead of just going through all the stuff that I bought in Japan, I'm kind of going to talk about a few things I noticed collecting in Japan. So, one major thing has to do with boxed games, right? These are three of the boxed games I got: Chrono Trigger, Mother 2, and Fire Emblem Genealogy, the Holy War. Obviously, all three of those games are in Japanese. Kind of stinks, but anyway, a lot of people who go to Japan, or a lot of people I know who have wanted to go, talk about getting boxed Pokemon games, Pocket Monsters. I got Gold, and I actually down here, I don't know if you can see it right here, but I got a copy of Sapphire as well. And I wanted to talk about that. So something that I found interesting is that but finding box games, especially, I got this copy of Fantasy Zone and this stack of Famicom games, but boxed games are way more common, like infinitely more common. And I would actually say, I was in Tokyo, Osaka, Kyoto, and Hiroshima, and of those places, really all of the places that I went, I would say definitely Tokyo and Kyoto had definitely Tokyo though. But if we're talking about Tokyo and we're just gonna stick with that, I would say they almost had more boxed games in some places than unboxed. Now again, that might just be me. Obviously they take up more space and things like that, so maybe just looking at it. But I had no trouble finding these games. Like if I want, I mean, to be fair, these are three very popular games, but like I wanted a copy of Fantasy Zone on the Famicom. I ended up getting it at Super Potato. More about that in a second. And it really wasn't hard to find these. I mean, I will say the Pokemon games, funny enough, I wanted to get another copy for one of my friends of any of them. This copy of Silver is actually a 3DS copy. That's pretty cool. But ignoring that, I wanted to get another copy, and it was hard to find. And I didn't really know why. I could have, I think I could have found copies in a lot of places, but I took a trip from uh, the East Coast to the West Coast and back across Japan, and I feel like my second time in Tokyo, I was, I actually I think it was Kyoto. It was Kyoto where I was looking for the Pokemon games because I thought it'd be cool to get some there, and they had Pokemon games, but they weren't boxed. They had a ton of them, but they weren't boxed. And they said the boxed copies went really quickly. At least that's what I thought they meant. And they had a ton of like manuals and things like that, but like completely boxed for some reason. Now, an important thing to say about that is just that the store I went to in this case, the one in Kyoto, was not just a video game store. They call them like recycle shops, is what they actually call them. And in those places, you're going to be getting a lot of pre-owned items. And this was a recycle shop, so it wasn't necessary. I mean, it focused, like, I would say it was three floors, and two of the floors, so the bottom floor was all video games. The second floor was more like some video games and some memorabilia, and then the top floor was all figures. Like literally, the entire thing was just like Figma and I'm completely Nendoroids and things like that. And that's really cool, but like they didn't have as much of a focus on video games. Now, that being said, it was still a better video game store than 99.9% of the stores I've been to in the US. And I guess my point here is it was funny because it wasn't hard to find boxed games. And I wonder if that's a cultural thing, just not throwing them out, or maybe it's just because there were more copies or something. But I will say that it was way easier to get boxed games, and it almost was weird because, like, if you wanted to get, for example, if you wanted to get off the top of my head, a copy of Chrono Trigger without the box was about $8, but with the box it was about $25. And now we're talking about, like, it's hard with Chrono Trigger because that's a $125 or something game in the US just for the cartridge. But like my point really is, you're kind of like, yeah, the prices are all lower, but if you're going to get them boxed, you're really paying the same price you'd pay in the US for a lot of games to get them just as cartridges, to get them boxed in Japan. So that's one huge thing. So maybe you're not saving money, giant air quotes, saving money, but you're not spending as much money to get them boxed, which is really cool. Moving on to something else that I bought, and I'm trying to mix in things I bought with a little bit of like backstory on it and stuff. Another thing that was interesting that I grabbed, I didn't actually grab this. I got that in the U.S. Was this Danganronpa PSP Collector's Edition. This is sick. This is really cool. And one thing that I will definitely note is that it was hard because this here, I believe, off the top of my head, now, someone who speaks Japanese, if anybody ever sees this video, or rather can read Japanese, I believe this says something about, it doesn't seem to be missing anything, so I think it says something about how it's not in perfect shape or something like that. There is a big crease on it. Now, when I bought it, I did notice that, but it was hard to notice because of something else I noticed in Japan, and that's that everything, every game, every single game that I bought there was plastic wrapped. Like they use shrink wrap on it, and that's consoles, and that's all kinds of other stuff. And I thought that was so interesting that they do that, because I do know some stores in the U.S. that do that, but it seems so much, it doesn't seem as prevalent. And you can even notice it here with this. I got this Sonic Chocolate Crunch tin at the Tokyo Joyopolis, and you can see here, like, this is shrink wrap too. Now that makes a little bit more sense. There's food in there, but every video game, like everything, like even these Famicom games had shrink wrap on them, and it's cool, but regardless, yeah. So that's another thing I noticed, a lot of shrink wrap. With the Famicom, I'll get on in a second to the actual console itself, which I bought there, but all these games, I was able to find, miraculously, games like Famicom Wars here, the precursor to Advance Wars. I was able to find them just based on matching up their characters, the first character of their name. They list them, obviously. They've got, like, the different kanji or katakana or whatever we're dealing with, or hiragana or whatever, katakana. And if you can sort of figure out, what the first character of the game you're looking for is, that makes it a lot easier to find the game, because they list it that way. At the same time, when you're looking for a box, like, for example, this Fantasy Zone, you can see that it's got Opa Opa on there, and it says Sunsoft, so you kind of know what you're looking for. But now I'm going to kind of pivot to something I found interesting as well. I think I've got a better example over here too, with games that were only released in Japan. I've got Sin and Punishment here, and I've got Custom Robo, and this applies twice as much with games that really don't require the language. But of course, then there's games like Mother 1, 2, and I also purchased 3, which is one of my favorite games of all time. And some of the early Fire Emblem games that they know are popular. Now, I gotta say, the Japanese market isn't missing a beat with understanding that these games are popular in the United States, and they definitely know when these games can be imported easily. Definitely know. I did see some places that listed whether a game was import friendly or not, but for the most part, they're just like, we know that tourists are going to come in here, and they're going to want a copy of Chrono Trigger, even if they can't read it. Chrono Trigger was a little bit cheaper just because, I really can't play that game that way. I've played it before, but I guess like Pokemon, they knew, like, that's a touristy kind of item, and the Mother games, they know, like, what are the chances I'm going to buy a copy of Earthbound, so they know they can get me for $40 on that copy of Mother 2, and $15, I think it was actually like $10 for that copy of Mother. But on the flip side, games that are plentiful, like Super Mario Bros. 3, you can see here that was about 400 yen, which is like $350 or even cheaper. I'll put that back later. But anyway, pivoting, just to finish that out, games especially that, Dojin the Giant, which is, not really a popular game, and Made in Wario, those were kind of cheap. Even though, like, Made in Wario, you don't need to play it in English. So, for the most part, like, they know, like, I could get a copy of WarioWare in the US for a decent price. So they didn't gouge me on that. That was like a $10 copy. And it's not perfect, but yeah. So my point there is, they know what games are popular. They know what I can play and what I can read. So they've got that figured out. Another thing I grabbed, quickly before we get to the Famicom and that cool story, I grabbed these games in the back, these two Game Gear games, and I had this Akira figure from Virtua Fighter, and I actually grabbed this Astro City arcade cabinet toy. That's the coolest thing. I thought that was so cool. Another thing I've got here is Shenmue 2 for Dreamcast. And I think that's a good example of what I was just talking about. I did not grab that Third Strike while I was there, actually, but this right here is Shenmue 2. I think you can probably see it. Yeah, maybe just a little. Yeah, I'm not going to take it out. It's a little heavy for one hand. And Shenmue 2 is an example of, like, yeah, it wasn't released in the US, but it was released in English, and it's not necessarily expensive. So it's a good example of, like, you know, if you're a collector and you're there, yeah, it's something you can grab. I mean, you're not going to want to play it that way, but in reality, as a collector's item, they know, you know, the market understands that. A few things I grabbed down here on the bottom. I've been importing Sega Saturn games for a while, so some of this stuff I've had, but Pocket Fighter, really cheap, like 10, 15 bucks. And it's a good example of, like, why would you buy them in Japan instead of buying them on eBay? Well, I mean, that price almost doubles when you buy it on eBay just from shipping. If you're getting it from Japan, and if you're getting it from the US, somebody already paid that shipping cost, so they're going to charge you more. And Pocket Fighter is exclusive to the Saturn in Japan, so it's the best way to play the game. I'd say anywhere, including the arcade, just because it's so arcade perfect. And that's definitely a game that I recommend grabbing when you're in Japan. I saw it at Super Potato, and I'll talk a little bit about Super Potato now. People have talked about, and this refers to Knights, by the way, people talk a lot about Super Potato's prices being a lot higher than other places. Now, I mean, I've been there. I looked with my own two eyes. I mean, you can give me a ton of examples, but I looked with my own two eyes, and I can say they are reasonably overpriced. Reasonably overpriced. So, like, they are overpriced only because everything else was so cheap. That's the best way to put it. I grabbed this Saturn controller. Obviously, it's just a Saturn controller, but the great colors for like $8 at Super Potato. Like, come on. And this Nights into Dreams with the controller. Now, I've got an English copy over there. I don't know if you can see it. Yeah, you can see it back there. So it wasn't like I needed this game, but I was like, hey, it feels like the controller's in here. Now, I was betting on it because it didn't feel that heavy. If you've used the Sega Saturn 3D controller, you know it's not that heavy. And I was like, there's no way it's in here, because that cost me less than $20 US to grab. And it's in, like, perfect shape. And I managed to keep it in perfect shape on my way home. And I grabbed that at Super Potato. It was just sitting there. It was mixed in with, I mean, if you've seen Super Potato, it's like 4 floors or something of, like, a ton of stuff. So I saw it in there. I was like, oh my god, that's really cool. And I love the Japanese box art of Knights. So I guess my thing to say there is, Super Potato is definitely not the cheapest, but, they've got everything, and that's what I'm about to get into now. So ultimately, if you're looking for something and you can't find it, you're still going to get it cheaper at Super Potato than you would importing it or buying it in the US. And that's where we come to this Famicom. So what's the biggest benefit of a place like Super Potato? It's the stock and the options that you have. Stock and options. And what I mean by that is I wanted to buy a Famicom. So our first day in Japan, we stayed in a Moxie hotel. Is it Marriott Moxie? Yeah, I believe so. And we stayed in a Moxie, and they had Famicoms set up along the bar playing Super Mario Brothers and a few other games. And yeah, I went with my dad, and he was like, you've got to get one of those things. That's so cool that they have them set up. And I'm like, well, I've got an NES, I've got a top loader over here. So, like, what's really the point of grabbing another console? Well, I mean, I thought about it, and there's a few. I pretty much went to pick up most of the import friendly kind of games, and some that are not import friendly to play on it. I got Mario 1 and 3 just because they were so cheap. I got Famicom Wars. I got the 2 Fire Emblem games. I believe there were 2 on the Famicom, and I got Mother, some games that I could only play on this. But my whole point is, the reason that I bought it at Super Potato was because the other stores didn't have as much stock, and they really only had really nice quality ones. Now, this is in really good shape, this Famicom. That wire's going behind there. I mean, it's not perfect. The controllers are actually attached to the console, so, it's important to factor that in when you buy it. But Super Potato, I took a look, and it didn't come with the wires. You can buy it without the wires, which is great because they're going to overcharge you at a store like that. You can buy those on Amazon. And I looked at everything and I was like, this looks like it's in pretty good shape. They really, they're reputable. And this was about $20 cheaper than everywhere else to buy at Super Potato, not because they were charging less, but because I was able to get one that wasn't in perfect shape. So they marked it down, and it looks pretty damn great. Like, there's nothing really wrong with it, and except for having Sonic next to it, but and I didn't mention I got Rockman 3, Mega Man 3. Yeah, I grabbed that as well. That was cheap too. That was like $15, which it's not nothing, but it's great for that game. That's a really good game, by the way. Underrated compared to 2. And ultimately I was able to get this Famicom, which I got on my first night in Akihabara in Super Potato, and I got it and carried it the entire lengthwise distance of Japan with me on my back in my backpack the entire time. So that is definitely pretty funny to me. But anyway, that's most of what I got. I don't actually know where most of the other stuff would be. I guess I could mention there are actually some import games I got that I can't play. Back here, up on top, I'll actually pull it out. I grabbed a copy of Ape Escape 2001, or Get Saru, or Saru Saru Get, or something like that, whatever they call it in Japan. I can't read that well enough. I mean, that might not even say that. And I grabbed this copy of this game, and it doesn't play on my PS2, even soft-modded, because even soft-modded PS2s won't play Japanese games, or any region games other than the region that you're in. That kind of stinks. This was like $1, like less than $1. It was cool to get anyway, but that's just a word of warning that PS2 is not an import-friendly system whatsoever. And, I'll also mention this. This was like a quick pickup. This is a good example of, like, I just saw it and grabbed it, and that was it. And I think this was $30, and it's just got this little white dot here, which my OCD picks up on. But besides that, it's in perfect shape. And, like, this is the thing about Japan, right? Like, I don't even think... I just walked by a random video game store, saw this, and bought it. Like, it's not like... I feel like in the US, and I know this is like the nerdiest, most like fake nostalgic thing ever, but like I feel like in the US, especially with these bigger collector's editions, we have, a tendency to mark them up, and you've got to kind of search them out. This came to me, and another one like that is actually down here that I'm seeing now. I've already got the American Persona 4 Dancing All Night collector's edition, but I got the Japanese one, which is much smaller. It has the exact same stuff in it, not as much stuff actually, but for once. But I grabbed that, and it was so cheap. Like, I think this was like $20 used. Like, what the hell? And that's something interesting. Like, I feel like so much of what they had there was like they wanted to just get rid of it. Like, it wasn't like in the US market where, like, look, like, no one, I don't think, based on what I saw, would want to have this many games. Like, I feel like it's just a, they call a lot of the video game stores, they just call them recycle stores, because they're just recycling their old video games, getting rid of them. And, so I got some other stuff there. I got, I think I needed the Birth by Sleep of the 3 acrylics. I had the other 2. And I got this at the Square Enix Cafe, which did not go well. That was the first place we went. It was great, but they didn't have many food options, and it was definitely interesting eating a raw ham salad on the first night in Japan. My dad was not too happy about that.
But yeah, I figured I would just go through some of the collection. I got some other stuff. I got plushies at the Pokemon Center, a lot of that stuff. But there's a ton of videos about that from that perspective. I got this Kirby automaton, things like that. Automaton, I don't even know how you say that. I guess that's how you say it. I had the Smash copy, but Mario Golf was like $3. A lot of things were just really cheap and really easy to get. Like, it's not like here where it becomes a difficult thing to pick up a lot of these older video games and copies of games. Like, I guess my dream for the collecting market in the U.S. is that games go for what they're actually worth. I don't. How do I put this? Like, Fire Emblem Path of Radiance, right? Super, super expensive game. Like, if you get a copy of this for less than $100, you had a good day. Like, even if it's less than 100, like it doesn't even have to be much more than that. Like, much less than that, rather. Like less than $100. If you're paying less than 100, you got a good deal, and that blows my mind. Like, yeah, it's a rare game, and yeah, it's really good, but like, you gotta take a step back. That's almost twice the price of the game. Really, the only games I saw in Japan that were anywhere like that were like, I really wanted a copy of Dracula X, like, or Rondo of Blood, but like more specifically, I wanted Dracula X because it was the more affordable way to go, and even that in Japan was about $60 US. So that was about as expensive as it would have been back then. So it didn't go down. But I didn't really see anything that went up. I mean, I can't think of anything. And I got some really heavy hitting games. Like, I got Mother 2 and Mother 3 Pokemon games. Like, the box Pokemon games were like, I think I mentioned this earlier, I don't know. Like, I think that was like 30 and Sapphire was like 26 or something. Like, just random numbers off the top of my head. They didn't really charge much. I mean, even for Sin and Punishment, which is like the de facto example of an import friendly game that is worth your time and money, like a great game from a great publisher that you can play in English essentially, and it's easy to get, and in Japan at least, it's easy to get in Japan. It's like the de facto game to be imported. Like, there's no reason it didn't come over to the US. It's a great game, so it's worth the money. And still, I think that was like $20, and I was kind of surprised because like later in the week I was able to find it even cheaper. So I kind of like I wasn't kicking myself. I was doing so well with everything that I got, so I didn't really mind. But it's just so interesting to me that like it never felt like they. I don't really know how to put it. It's a weird fit. I feel like I'm talking in circles here. This is a rambling video. I didn't write it out, but it didn't feel like they were trying to sell to collectors. It felt like they were trying to sell to people who wanted to play the video games. That's kind of where I'm going with this. Like the stores were set up, and they didn't have these big glass like, okay, they in Akihabara, they had big glass cases that they were like trying to show off the games with or the consoles, and but it wasn't like they had like $40 like copies of games in cases trying to show them off. Like the cases were really just for like consoles and stuff. And it's just this big change in mentality between like like here's another one I missed. This I got a copy of Super Metroid for the Famicom. And Super Metroid, import friendly game. It's in English on the Super Famicom. Costs a lot of money in the US, like $60, $70. I think it's dropping actually, but I got this for like $20. And that's just like, they're like, it's a good game. We know we can make the $20 off of it, but ultimately, we could charge more, but we're not going to. And I get that it's a different market, but a lot of people go to Japan to one of the only places in Japan where I saw like a sizable number of visitors or foreigners was at these places. Was it at video game store? Super Potato was the only time I think there were more white people than Japanese people in a room in the entire time I was in Japan. So I guess my point here is it was amazing. It was really cool. I keep zooming in on this. I got the Sonic Curry and the Joyopolis candy. I got them at the same place. At the Joyopolis, the Joypolis. It's not even Joyopolis. It definitely should have been Joyopolis. But anyway, yeah, so my point here is Japan was amazing. A lot of interesting stuff I noticed. I'm not really talking about the actual experience of being there. I'm talking more about collecting in Japan. But ultimately, I would say that the one thing I learned that everybody everybody here should learn is that always remember that the goal of selling video games, yeah, if you own a store, your goal is to make money. But ultimately, video games should really always be about fun. So if you got a copy of Super Mario Brothers 3, what's the sense of jacking up the price? Everybody had copies of it. It's not rare. Yeah, you can get the money for it, but $3, three something, and you can change someone's life. And I think that's just a beautiful mentality that maybe I'm just crazy. Maybe that's not actually how how this all goes. Maybe they just want to make money and that's how they do it. But ultimately, there's a soul. There's a soul to the collecting scene in Japan, as minimal as it may be based on what I saw. And it's a soul that I'd love to see here. So thanks for watching. This is just sort of a video to talk about all that stuff. There's a lot more I could go into, but ultimately, I won't ramble forever. I've rambled enough. Thanks for watching.